welcome back to Tom's World Scale Model Series. In this episode, we undertake the construction phase of our Meng 1/35th scale Renault FT-17. If you enjoy programming on scale modeling, then show your support by subscribing to this channel. Leave us a comment, like, dislike, or share the video with friends. Clicking the notification bell gives you alerts when we post new content, or visit the channel Tom's World for a friendly visit for a complete list of all our videos. In episode 1, our unboxing showcased a premium kit with magnificent part detail and exquisite molding. The instructions revealed assemblies that were a marked departure from the standard World War II fare that's usually on our bench. Clearly we were heading into a new construction territory, and I was eager to put my model skills to the test on this most unique and nostalgic subject matter. In this video journal, we'll detail every aspect of the build from construction, painting, and weathering. So stick with us as we go over the top and travel back in time to visit the World War I era of tank design. As always, our build starts with removing parts from their sprue trees and cleaning them up in preparation for assembly. Very few tools are needed for this step. A knife or two with fresh sharp blades, sprue cutters, and a few sanding sticks and various grits get us started. I also like to set aside a plastic container with a tight lid. We can store our loose parts here, and the lid keeps the dust off. I work on a quality cutting mat. My workspace is brightly lit. Investing in a good quality adjustable desk lamp greatly improves the model building experience. In order to avoid stress cracks, I'll make my cuts on the sprue well away from the actual part. I can then go in with a sharp blade and remove more of the sprue gate remnant. We then finish with a sanding stick, which completely removes the sprue gate. This creates a clean look and a nice flat gluing surface for our parts. It's a good idea to inspect the parts as we clean them up. We're looking for mold parting lines and knockout scars. Here's the hull inner floor, and if we flip it over, we can see these odd tabs which we'll have to cut away so the parts fit snugly. We have to be careful not to remove these little raised tabs. These are the risers for the crew compartment floor. Here's the bottom of the hull exterior, and it's beautifully detailed with panel lines and rivets. On the inside, there's a few knockout scars which I've marked with a soft lead pencil. We can see these two depressions where the risers go. Thankfully, all the knockout scars are covered with the subfloor, so no need to clean them up. The real FT-17 is constructed with riveted plates, and our Meng kit replicates this method. We can see the kit builds up with many flat plate facets. The plastic facets are joined using miter joints, in some places compound miter joints, which are somewhat unforgiving. These joints make construction a little tricky since the fit of these facets is fairly critical. I was interested to see how well all the pieces would fit together and whether filler would be required. Since the hull sides are detailed on both sides, Meng uses these enormous sprue gates and odd knockouts to release the parts from their molds. And many of the sprue gates are located along these critical miter joints. In order to get a snug fit, we must clean up these joint surfaces, being careful not to distort or destroy the mitered edges. Building this kit will require a lot of dry fitting, and we'll put thin liquid cement to good use when we press the facets together. Here's a close-up of some of the odd knockout scars on the hull sides. They're a combination of sinkholes and conical protuberances. Thankfully, none of these sink marks are seen once the model is put together. I did remove the unsightly stubs, so these molding remnants were less noticeable. I'll be posing the driver compartment hatches open, so its interior surfaces will have to be painted and weathered. Here I'm dry fitting the hull together. I'm trying to get a sense of the hull's finished size to see if I should pre-paint and weather the interior surfaces prior to construction. Given how tiny the vehicle is, trying to get at the interior surfaces after they're assembled would be almost impossible. If you plan to pose your hatches open, definitely pre-paint and weather the interior prior to gluing up the hull. The kit has quite a few small and delicate parts. These control rods and the driver's control pedals are good examples. We have to be careful when working these parts. For delicate pieces, I usually remove them by cutting the sprue gate well away from the parts. I can then go in with a finer blade and remove most of the sprue gate. This method greatly reduces the chances of these delicate parts breaking. We then use sanding sticks and gently smooth the gate remnants until they disappear. All our parts should be free of sprue gates, sink marks, and parting lines or burrs. This bulkhead piece, which supports the driver's backrest, gets attached to the hull subfloor. There are 2 holes and a slot into which this bulkhead is supposed to be inserted. Either the tabs are cast too large or the holes are too small. This prevents the bulkhead from seating properly. I really didn't want to fiddle with the holes, so I simply removed the tabs from the bulkhead piece. After removing the tabs, the bulkhead piece then fits snugly into its slot. The wheels in this kit were a challenge. They're tiny and there's lots of them, 18 road wheels and 10 return rollers in all. Meng casts the wheels on these chunky sprues. The sprue gates are thick and contact the wheels on their delicate rims. The return rollers are really tiny and they're hard to remove from those beefy gates without creating stress cracks seen as white lines. We have to very carefully cut the wheels from their gates. We then have to delicately remove each sprue gate. Set aside a little time since there's 56 gates to contend with. Given the teeny size of these wheels and the hefty sprue gates, care must be taken not to mar or flatten the wheel rims. The job required a file, sanding sticks, patience, and a lot of elbow grease. Using a number 11 X-Acto blade for size comparison, we appreciate just how small these wheels actually are. This kit has many such tiny and delicate parts. The instructions build up the running assembly with articulated suspension rocker arms and free spinning wheels. The "Do Not Apply Glue" label appears prominently. While unpractical as a matter of the overall build, I was intrigued, so I built this assembly per the instructions. If we build according to the instructions, we get these free traveling pivot joints with the wheels spinning freely. Meng's design actually follows the running gear of the real FT-17, complete with the articulated bogies and leaf springs. Building up the articulated running gear was fun and interesting, but the resulting assembly is somewhat flimsy. The 2 plates that sandwich the wheels are attached by 2 tiny posts, which doesn't give a lot of gluing surface or strength. The assembly is adequate but somewhat flimsy, so builders should seriously contemplate gluing these parts. Here's one of the completed return roller assemblies. These are glued in place. Although a considerable amount of work, the running assembly looks great once it's complete. Here I've dry fit everything together to get an appreciation for the kit's engineering and detail. The form and structure of the running gear is a fascinating change from the more traditional late tank design bogies, suspension, and wheels that us modern tank builders are used to. Having determined that the model's interior would require pre-painting, it was time to prepare our hull interior parts. There was a little mold release grease on the parts, so I cleaned the surfaces with rubbing alcohol. This ensures good adhesion for our paint. Here the parts are ready for painting. We compose the driver's compartment with open hatches so we can see inside the vehicle, and the kit has parts to add detail to this compartment. Care must be taken when installing this dial panel. There are no witness marks on the hull side, so we have to position the panel freehand. We get the positioning by studying the instruction drawing. I coat all the exposed interior surfaces with flat black enamel paint. Then, with the exception of the tank's floor, I sprayed the interior surfaces with a coat of white acrylic, then a clear acrylic gloss coat. I wanted to give the tank's floor a worn metal look, so I decided to use the hairspray technique. For my undercoat, I had some Alclad 2 metal lacquer paint sitting around, so I sprayed it over the floor's flat black enamel. Over top of the lacquer, I applied a layer of hairspray. Then on top of that, I sprayed a coat of acrylic paint, in this case Tamiya's Field Gray. Although labeled as gray, the color is actually more of an olive green drab. Once the Field Gray was sufficiently dry, with a large brush heavily moistened with water, I wore away the acrylic paint. The water dissolves the hairspray and it loosens the acrylic paint. The lacquer and enamel layers are impervious to water, so those layers don't wear away. The result is a convincing warm metal painted look. The subfloor has beautiful detail, which unfortunately is covered by the floor, but this also relieves us of having to fill those nasty knockout dents. I weathered the interior with my usual procedure. I start with a pin wash and oil colors ranging from burnt umber to black. My gloss coat allows the oil wash to flow into the nooks and crannies of the detail. Although the subfloor detail is hidden, I get a feel to see how my colors are working. Once the pin wash is almost dry, I tap the paint with a soft brush. This removes tide marks and feathers and blends the edges into the base coat. Next I add chips. I'll apply these with a sponge. Any soft sponge will do. I gather a small piece into a ball and I rip little bits off with tweezers to get a rough edge. Then I mix a small batch of enamel dark gray metal color. We dip our sponge into the paint and dab off the excess. We then gently touch the sponge onto our white surface. Practice this technique off the model until you get the hang of applying thin, delicate splotches. If you use too much paint or dab too hard, you can make a mess of things. And don't overdo it. It takes only a few chips here and there to get the desired effect. And here's the finished look. This kit is intended for builders with intermediate to advanced model building skills. Every structure has to be built up. There is no bathtub hull or precast turret in the box. In my opinion, this kit's hull, as engineered, lacks ample bulkheads or stiffening braces. The thickness of the plastic on the hull sides is thin, so it flexes. This flex can really mess with the alignment of the many interconnecting facets that build up the model. For example, here are all the parts that make up the driver's hatching. And all these parts have to be installed in this oddly shaped hole, and all the edges have to align. Likewise, the turret is made completely from mitered faceted sides. Even though the finished turret is tiny, a surprising amount of parts go into building it up. Although I was careful when building up the hull, I couldn't get all the facets to fit perfectly. In most places I was able to get passable joints, but some will definitely need filling. Getting all those interdependent facets with their mitered joints to fit perfectly will definitely try your modeling skills. These little horns that protrude from the bottom of the vehicle plate seem odd, but we can see in the instructions that this is the correct alignment for these parts. It's the same story with the turret. Most of the joints were tight, but some definitely will need filling. I use a water-based putty to fill the more objectionable seams. I can thin the putty and apply it with a brush. Then the joint is cleaned up with a moistened swab. Since I don't have to sand the putty, there's no danger of destroying any of that beautiful bolt detail. The kit includes a small PE sheet. Oddly, the parts aren't numbered, although there is a pressing where presumably the number should have gotten stamped. The parts are easily identifiable, but if needed we can refer to the sprue map in the instructions. To remove the brass parts from the tree, I use a fresh blade and I cut on a glass cutting board. Any hard surface will do, but when we apply pressure to the blade, we want to cut the sprue gate without distorting the delicate piece. We then clean up the edges with a diamond file. We attach brass to plastic with CA glue. CA is unforgiving, so once the part is laid down, it doesn't move. I usually dry fit the part and outline its placement with a mechanical pencil. For the insignia mounting plate, I also lay down a line with masking tape. I usually rehearse the placement dry a few times to steady my hands. Then we take a breath and drop the part on. 9 parts build up the trenching sled, and the photo etched brass and tiny handles produce a beautiful, scaled and delicate look. And that'll do it for this part 1 of our Meng FT-17 build. Make sure to tune in for part 2 where we'll bring this project to an amazing conclusion. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, share the video with friends, or comment like, dislike. As always, thank you for joining me, stay well, and all the best.